So my book White Death is all about this extraordinary uprising that took place in 1823, almost 200 years ago, in Demerara, now Guyana. And it's the story of a small group of enslaved men and women who fought for their freedom against the British colonists. The book is also about the legacy of slavery today. How does it impact us today? And what, if anything, we can do about it?
Right. And why the interest in the 1823 uprising?
Yeah, so I mean, I came to the story very late. When I was growing up, I knew quite a lot about slavery in North America, in the United States. Very little about the Caribbean. If I was taught about Britain and slavery, it was we were the great emancipators. We were the good guys, you know, William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery. And I knew almost nothing about Britain in the Caribbean, certainly not about what happened in Guyana. And I was really attracted to the story because it was a microcosm of Britain and its role in slavery at that period.
Okay. And so I'm familiar with your work. I'm familiar with the book that you wrote. And from my understanding, there's also a sort of personal connection to it because of your own family history. Could you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I've been writing books for about 10 years now, and my recent book was about my mother's family. And while I was writing that book, I learned, and it was a total surprise to me, that they'd had a tobacco business in the 19th century. And almost certainly they would have imported their tobacco from Virginia in the United States. And that means almost certainly it would have come from plantations worked by enslaved people. Now, that's the first time I put that together, and it was quite a shock. And particularly because over the last few years, I've been writing about my father's family, and they were German Jewish. They had to flee the Nazis in the 1930s. They came to Britain. My grandmother was kicked out of university by the Nazis. Our property was stolen from us. Members of our family were killed in the Holocaust. And so I've very much been seeing our family as the victims. And then suddenly now the shoe is on the other foot.
I'm interested to know, your book is called White Death. Before coming to Guyana, before researching and getting immersed into the story, was that the idea you had in mind for the direction of your book?
You know, when I started the book, it was very much I wanted to understand more about Britain and slavery. I was embarrassed about how little I knew, to be honest. I hadn't done much reading. I hadn't spoken to many people about it. And the more I read, the more a question kind of dominated my thinking. It was very clear very quickly that a profound harm had been done. Britain was responsible for transporting over 3 million captive Africans to the Americans. Over a third died in the Middle Passage during those horrible slave ships. The mortality rates were extraordinarily high. People didn't live that long on the plantations. Their existence was brutal. Children were separated from their parents in the slave auctions. I mean, it was really appalling. A harm had clearly been done. Then the question was, who was responsible and what to do about it? And the more I thought about it, the more it became pretty obvious, and I became very uncomfortable. From my research, it became really clear that the vast majority of people involved in the kidnapping and the transport of the enslaved Africans were white. The vast majority of the people who owned the plantations and estates, who managed the estates, who worked in the slave auctions, they called them vendus, were white. The more I thought about it, it became pretty obvious who was responsible, and that is white people.
You seem very immersed in the conversation currently. Obviously, you've written a book on it. But what do you see sort of the next steps for yourself?
Well, you know, we're having a conversation in our family. So one of the things that came out of this research is a general kind of appetite in my family to start looking more at our history. And we've had a series of quite difficult and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. They've been very productive. There's been a small number of people who've been defensive, you know, who felt worried about our reputation, who felt worried about not being respectful for four parents, but the vast majority of people in my family have been very committed to not only understanding and educating themselves, but also doing something about it. And so we've had some really interesting conversations. More than that, I'm committed to continuing these conversations in the public, whether it be in the media or in events. And I've committed to having various, being part of various panel conversations, supporting various organizations, and also to continue my education.